Hi everyone, Jason here from spiritualbabies.net, and you've joined us. We're going to have a look at the book of Ruth. We're going to go through Ruth like we've gone through a lot of books now, and very enjoyable, leading us through this much requested series by Rabbi Joshua Neely. Thank you very much for giving us your time.
Always my pleasure.
So Ruth is a fun one. There's certainly from my background and lots of my audience, Ruth is kind of a bit of a role model in that she wasn't born Jewish. And then she's an amazing heritage ahead of her as regarding her grandchildren. And then there's also an interesting question of her race and her culture and what the Torah says about that and how can she be when she shouldn't be. And we'll get there. But Ruth is an interesting character. Not to mention the pledge. The pledge comes up so often, so it's going to be good getting into that. Not least because I want to know if I'm right when we get there. I have a position on that, and it'd be fun to see how that goes. So we're going to jump straight in. Like with Yoel, I didn't read through because I've read it through a couple of times, and I wanted it to be I wanted to read it fresh. So I haven't read it for a good while. Right, Ruth 1:1. In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land. So we'll stop right there, I think. So which land are we talking about?
This is definitely talking about the land of Israel,
Mm-hmm.
because we know that the famine cannot be larger than that, or else there would be no way to find food in the next country over.
Right. Fair enough.
So it's a pretty straight logical deduction. Again, I think we've talked before that sometimes people will use the word, eretz or aretz in its spousal form as being a synonym for the entire world, like in the discussion of the famine of Egypt and like the discussion of the flood. But really, the term land is a very contextual word. Mm. So you have to put your thinking cap on and figure out whether it's talking narrowly, expansively, what it's actually talking about. And here it definitely seems to be talking about a famine in the land of Israel.
Now, I've read as well, I think a different version. It didn't say chieftains. It said something along the lines of rulers or judges.
Well, so it's the term that's used is the word a shofet, which is, or a shoftim because it's a plural here. Which is the word that can literally be translated as judge. The problem, of course, is that in the English language, the word judge has pretty much only one meaning, which is somebody who adjudicates on a trial.
Right.
And that's not really the limit of what a shofet was in the biblical times. A shofet was really more like a chieftain. I mean, it's not just a chieftain in the sense they weren't just a ruler of a particular tribe, but they usually had some larger connection to the broader destiny of the nation. But it still wasn't up to the level of a king. But it also was a little bit more than what we might call a chief in modern English as well. So it's hard to come up with a really good English word that summarizes everything that the word shofet means in this period of history.
I suppose, given Ruth's relationship with David, we can roughly come up with a pocket of time that we can place this narrative into.
Well, yes, I mean, we have an entire book called Shoftim. But then you can get into more debate of precisely when during Shoftim. I should point out that in Rabbinic tradition, the book of Shoftim was not taken as being written purely chronologically. So although there are some chronological sections where one takes over after another, some of them seem to be free-floating independent, and so there are debates about when they fit into the overall timeline.
Right.
The tradition is that if we want to go by what the rabbinic tradition says of the timeline for this particular story, is to give that Boaz is actually the same person as Eve's son. And that was who was the judge during this time. So it makes Boaz actually out to be one of the Shoftim.
Oh, okay. All right. In the days when the chieftains ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man of Bethlehem in Judah, with his wife and 2 sons, went to reside in the country of Moab. It's interesting to me that they lead with, because I suppose in the book of Ruth, for me, the star of the show is Naomi. I know that Ruth she gets the headline billing, but Naomi really makes a lot of the hard decisions and takes on Ruth, which she then has to kind of try and provide for. I know that Ruth, she works hard too, but it's interesting that it's not a woman and her husband and her 2 sons, but it's interesting that they lead with the guy, because he's not really around for too long. Spoilers if you haven't read.
If you haven't read more than the first few verses.
Right.
Excuse me. Well, that's right. However, it's also to her credit that she's not being seen as the instigator here.
Right.
Right. So the verbiage, literally the verb, is in the singular masculine, which means it was his decision to leave, and his wife and his children went with him. So that's actually to his credit, because he should not have left.
Mm.
Right? Why is he leaving the land of Israel? Now you could say, well, because there was a famine. But eventually, again, spoilers, they're going to end up back in the land of Israel. And lo and behold, not everyone's dead. Mm. So apparently the famine was perfectly survivable. So for him to leave in order to make his life more comfortable, or some people say that it was because he was very wealthy and he was tired of people asking for freebies, for tzedakah, for charity. Basically, the tradition does not look well on him for leaving during this time.
Right. Okay.
And then, as you've already mentioned, to end up in Moab is especially galling. Moab was a frenemy of Israel. That is to say, they were from our same ancestral stock, coming from Lot, but they were not welcoming or friendly to us when we left Egypt, and there was a long-running animosity between the 2 countries ever since.
It's very specific as well, isn't it, in the Torah? I mean, there aren't many people that are called out to such a degree that you can never become a part of Israel. I mean, it's really... there's a stamp on that, which we might have to, when we get there, we'll ask about that. Okay. With his wife and 2 sons, and went to reside in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, and his wife's name was Naomi, and his 2 sons, which I think I'll do okay here. His 2 sons were named Mahlon and Chilion. Ephrathites of Bethlehem in Judah. They came to the country of Moab and remained there.
Well, the names of the 2 kids seem to be more nicknames by the author than the names that the actual parents would have ever given them.
Oh, okay.
Since one means sickness and the other means destruction.
Oh, wow.
So it's not exactly the kind of names that most loving parents would give to their kids.
That's right.
This is my son Plague, my other son War.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A boy named Sue. Maybe that's what's going on. It was a particularly difficult delivery, so they thought we'll get it. Wow, I didn't know that. Okay. Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. So she's in a foreign country now, one which I imagine at this point didn't look any more favorably against to the children of Israel than the children of Israel did to Moab. So she's there alone, no husband.
And that is, really a catastrophe, because in the time, women could not inherit from their husbands, and women didn't inherit from their children. So, and the wives of the 2 boys also would not have inherited from them. Everything that they had would technically be possessed by a male relative of Elimelech. So she is technically left with nothing. And she is far from any family relationships, which means she's got no one to depend on there in Moab. She is really a stranger in a strange land now.
Right. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and one named Ruth. and they lived there about 10 years. Then these two, Mahlon and Chilion, also died, so the woman was left without her two sons and without her husband. Do we know anything about the names Orpah and Ruth?
We know that Orpah is probably coming from the same word as Oref, which is the back of the neck, the nape of the neck. And there are some that say that's probably because she eventually turns away from. I
see. Okay.
And you see her back, so to speak, as she goes. But it's not explained in text. And then Ruth, there's no 100% explanation for this. So one explanation is that it is a modification of the word re'ut, which is the word for friendship, which I think is very nice.
Yeah.
But it isn't necessarily clear what Ruth is derived from.
Okay, fair. She started out with her daughters-in-law to return to the country of Moab. To return from the country of Moab. For in the country of Moab she had heard that the Lord had taken note of his people and had given them food. So she's heard that Israel's situation of being in the point of famine had changed, and now they're surviving. She thinks best choice for me would be to head back to Israel. The laws, at least taking care of the poor, would be more applicable to her in Israel than they would be in Moab. So, therefore, returning makes the most sense for just surviving. Accompanied by her two daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living, and they set out on the road back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Turn back, each of you, to her mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and me." I mean, you might ask at this point, because this is quite a long journey, I assume, to do on your own. So she's thinking about the girls more than she's thinking about herself.
Well, because, she knows that for them to return with her to the land of Israel is not an easy proposition. They are then giving up their country, and she knows how hard that is because she's lived in a foreign country now for 10 years. And there is little that she can offer. As we already talked about, being from Moab is heavily stigmatized in the land of Israel. And just showing up, what does she have to offer them? They will almost certainly have a better and easier life if they simply return to their families' homes and get on with their life from there. Now, I should point out at this point that according to tradition, they both were royalty, that they actually came from the Moabite kingly family.
Wow.
So even more so, they have better prospects if they stay in country than if they return to the land of Israel.
I hadn't heard that before. That's interesting. Okay. At some point, we'll have to go and we'll dig into those little bits and find out why those traditions were formulated. May the Lord grant that each of you find security in the house of your husband. And she kissed them farewell. They broke into weeping and said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." So at this point, both of the daughters-in-law are wanting to leave with Naomi.
They apparently do have genuine affection for her, which is not always the case with mother-in-laws, and it is very touching that they do want to go with her, but she is going to be insistent.
But Naomi replied, "Turn back, my daughters. Why should you go with me? Have I any more sons in my body who might also be husbands for you? Turn back, my daughters, for I am too old to be married. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I were married tonight and bore sons, should you wait for them to grow up? Should you on their account debar yourselves from marriage? Oh no, my daughters, my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me."
The issue of levirate marriage. Because the two families, the two brothers, died without leaving any heirs.
Right.
That means technically the brother is supposed to marry the widow in order to provide heirs for them. Obviously, there are no more brothers. And at this point, there seems to be a feeling that they could still have waited if there was an unborn child, perhaps, a brother yet to be. But she's saying, look, not only are there no more sons for you, I don't have any kid that's coming out that you could wait for. And even if I got married tonight and had a kid, would you sit around waiting until he was old enough to be married in order to do this? But what she's underpinning there, or the underpinning of all of that, is that she knows that these women are waiting with her out of loyalty to their dead husbands.
Oh, okay.
Right? That they are waiting to try to be able to give them an heir that they couldn't give while they were alive, while the two men were alive. And they are hoping to be able to fulfill that through a family relation, through a son, a brother for one of them. And she's basically saying, that's not going to happen.
It's
that's
interesting,
not going to happen,
isn't it? Because it kind of gives you the impression that the men must have died very soon after marriage, unless there was some other issue going on, for them not to have. I mean, it must have been within I don't know. It must have been very quick.
Fertility issues, can take a great deal of time. There's no guarantee that you're going to get pregnant in the very first year of marriage. Look at Abraham and Sarah. It took them quite a bit.
That's true. So the line, for my lot is far more bitter than yours, for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me. Lot, I can read as a random event. But for the hand of the Lord has struck out against me, the hand of the Lord is usually a kind of a very sweeping tool in the text. It's like plague and famine and that kind of feel to it. And she's saying that has been struck against her.
Right. Well, so there's no actual word "lot." I should point out in the Hebrew itself.
Okay.
Basically she's saying it is what I have is more bitter. Right. Mar li, it is bitter for me. Me'od mikem, that's even worse for me than it is for you. Right. So she's basically saying, I'm a lost cause, but you still have hope. And of course, Mar is a beautiful play on her own word, right? Naomi means sweet, and Mar is bitter. So she's basically saying, I'm named sweet, but actually my life is now bitter. I've lost my husband, my two sons, I've got nothing. So there's that idea. And that's why she's saying things are so bad for me that it is as if God has struck out at me, right? God has sent his hand against me. That's certainly the way she is feeling at this point. Now, does that mean God actually has? Or is that just saying, as this is a quote, the way it can feel to a person when they are suffering tragedy after tragedy?
Right.
And I think personally it's much more the latter. Because as we're going to see, God apparently has nothing against Naomi or Ruth because they're going to end up doing just fine. Excuse me.
That's okay. They broke into weeping again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law farewell. So Orpah at this point has decided, yeah, you're probably right.
Right. Again, the farewell is implied because it doesn't actually say farewell in the text. It just says she kissed her mother-in-law, and Ruth clung to her. And the idea is that the kiss, because of what we get in verse 15, was a goodbye. So the translator is trying to help us understand what the kiss means. But yeah, the word farewell technically is not there in the text.
Okay. But Ruth clung to her. And she said, see, your sister-in-law has returned to her people and her gods. Go follow your sister-in-law. But Ruth replied, and this is the big one. But Ruth replied, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back and not follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. It's interesting because I've never really thought about it before, that the line at the end, this is actually kind of a full response to Naomi's... Naomi uttered, see, your sister has returned to her people and her gods. And Ruth is covering all the bases, saying that my people will be your people and your God shall be my God. So often, this comes up a lot, I see people that think that will use this as an evidence that they are Israel now. They believe that they've they've said this out loud, and therefore they're part of the people of Israel. And I try to point them that this wasn't a dedication to God. This was a dedication to Naomi. At this stage, I imagine that Ruth understood Naomi's faith, but it doesn't necessarily mean that she shared it. So it's interesting to me. It'll be interesting to me to hear what you say about this. I mean, it's obviously a dedication, but I would say and argue that it was more of a dedication towards her mother-in-law, who she must have seen at that point as more than just a relative by marriage. I mean, she's offering here to change who she is fundamentally, to become the same people as Naomi's people.
And so, what is striking is, as you're pointing out, is that there is a mixture here of her dedication to Naomi, but there does also seem to be an acceptance of God as her God, because she doesn't just say, your God. She goes on to say in verse 17, Adonai, that God is who she is making this oath through. So there is a combination of her dedication to her mother-in-law, but there's also a seeming acknowledgement of God as God, of the Lord as God, if you will, which is why this does still fit very archetypically as the crux of the emotion of conversion. Now, as for people who say, look, if I say this and I mean it, that means I'm Jewish, or I'm part of Israel, if they somehow are uncomfortable using the term Jewish, I would point out, well, no, because if your people are my people, then that means you have to actually adhere to the ways of my people. And that means you don't get to just say, I'm playing by my own rules. Right? That's not what it is to be part of a people. Right? To claim an ethnicity, to claim a culture, to claim an identity that is part of a peoplehood means that you are willing to go with the identity of those people, not just borrow it or appropriate it from them, as though it is something that is sitting on the road that can be picked up without their consent and without their involvement. The whole idea of verses 16 and 17 is a commitment to a group as well as to God, and you can't reject the group while trying to claim the mantle of their name.
I think that's one of the key points is that the one line, and your God should be my God, and it comes after I will lodge with your people, and also we've got the main story of Ruth comes after this pledge, and shows her working hard within a community. I mean, she works hard, and I think that's the measure that people use when they look at her as being part of their people. They see that she works hard. The report is good. But I'll crack on.
Well, and she not only works hard, but she follows Jewish law.
Right.
She follows the norms of the community. She is not saying, I understand what God wants, and the rest of you are doing it wrong. She is not presumptuous. She is learning from Naomi what is allowed and what should be done, and she implements it, and she is then praised for following the ways of the people and God. So it is, yes, it goes hand in hand. You can't separate one from the other.
So in its entirety, do not urge me to leave you, to turn back, and not to follow you. For wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. Thus and more may the Lord do to me, if anything but death parts you from me. So that's, you're right. She's made a pledge at the end, and the mark of that pledge, she's put at God's door as a witness to her of her statement.
I should also point out one little linguistic thing. The phrase lodge, which is I think sometimes not used in modern English very much, is talking about I understand that this path is going to be hard, right? We're not going to have a residence. We're not going to be able to live comfortably somewhere settled. the term lodge it means temporary dwelling. So we're going to go, and it's not going to be easy. So she's not under the illusion that they're returning to a palace in the land of Israel.
Mm.
Additionally, I went through the entire rabbinic interpretation of this passage during my few weeks ago my Pathway to Judaism class on conversion, because the rabbis break down each one of these pieces as being part of a conversation between Naomi and Ruth, as Naomi is trying to explain what Judaism means.
Okay.
And Ruth is accepting each piece of it. So, when it says, for example, let me get my, where you go, I will go. The rabbis say, that Naomi was trying to explain to her that you're not allowed to be alone with men that aren't your husband. And she's like, fine, where you go, I'll go. And where she says, where you lodge, I will lodge, that Naomi had been trying to explain. You understand that we have to live apart from other nations sometimes because of our commandments. And she's like, fine, where you go, I'll go. And the same thing with your God is my God, and all of that. She takes step by step as a way of trying to teach her what Judaism means.
Okay.
And then at the very end, with verse 18, the rabbis also say that this also teaches us that once someone has shown such commitment, we don't push them away over much. Because Naomi's going to accept her.
Right.
So yes, you try and explain
there's nothing
it and
here
say,
about...
hey, are you sure about this? But once you see they're sure, you don't continue to discourage.
So there's no turning Ruth away 3 times?
No, well, it depends. So the whole idea of turning away 3 times is really often misunderstood.
Right.
Right? Returning someone away 3 times means explaining to them the severity of what it is that they are committing themselves to. And doing so in a very frank and matter-of-fact way, and in a way that can intimidate those that are not prepared. Right? If you explain, look, this is what it means to be Jewish. You're going to have to do this, that, and the other. You're no longer going to be able to do these things, and this is the attitude of the world to you. That's turning someone away. It doesn't mean slamming a door in someone's face. It doesn't mean refusing to have a conversation. It means pushing them away by giving them the truth of what it is to be Jewish, but not trying to belittle them, not trying to make them feel unwelcome, just saying, look, you don't really need this. And if the person is still committed, then yes, we stop pushing.
18. When, and in brackets, Naomi, I said brackets like I lived in a Stangler still, like a farmer. Naomi. When Naomi saw how determined she was to go with her, she ceased to argue with her. And the two went until they reached Bethlehem. When they arrived in Bethlehem, the whole city buzzed with excitement over them. The women said, "Can this be Naomi?" Well, that's a nice thing to be remembered. And with excitement as well. I wonder if you lived in a small town and it got hard and you left with your husband because you thought it'd be easier somewhere else, you might not be as kindly regarded when you walked back.
Well, and there is a certain element of that in their exclamation, right? Hazot Naomi? I mean, is this really Naomi? Because why would she be borderline unrecognizable? Because she's not returning the way she left, right? She left with wealth, and she left with husbands, she left with kids, and she's coming back now, obviously poor, probably just on foot, and with some strange girl that no one else can recognize.
Right.
So it's a bit of, oh wow, she's come back, and also of, wow, is that really the same woman? Because that's not what she looked like 10 years ago.
Right, yeah, there's no sons, there's no husband. Well, the next one's exciting because, I'm hoping we'll get this out before Pesach this year. And I just noticed the word there, which I'm thinking might ring true. Do not call me Naomi, she replied. Call me Mara. For Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. Am I right in thinking that the word I'm reading is similar to the word for bitter herbs?
For maror, indeed. It exactly is the same. Or it's from the same root. So this verse 20 and 21 is a little bit of pseudo-poetry.
Okay.
And we know it's pseudo-poetry, that it's almost lyrical, partly because of just the beautiful construction, but also because of the way that she brackets it by using the term Shaddai, which is never used by itself. It's usually El Shaddai,
Right.
which is usually translated as God Almighty. And it's usually only used when it's saying Shaddai by itself in poetic constructions in other parts of the Tanakh. So she almost breaks into poetry for her reflection on her own life.
That's interesting to me. It makes me wonder. It makes me wonder if she's recalling a way of transmitting information which she might have heard or read in a book that we just don't have the availability of now. Because I mean, we've got a certain amount of psalms in the Tanakh, but there were, infinite songs, and I wonder why in the course of her life was she known for doing this, or is this something that she was? Anyway, I'm rambling. Rabbit trails. Okay, do not call me Naomi, she replied. Call me Mara, for Shaddai has made my lot very bitter. I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty. How can you call me Naomi when the Lord has dealt harshly with me, when Shaddai has brought misfortune upon me? Thus Naomi returned from the country of Moab. She returned with her daughter-in-law Ruth the Moabite. It's the first time really they mention her as the full title. They arrive in Bethlehem at the beginning of the barley harvest. It's a brilliant end to a chapter, because I mean they wouldn't have been really in chapters, but it really it's a nice conclusion to the first part of the book.
It is, and the book of Ruth is a great place for somebody that is cutting their teeth on biblical Hebrew to read, because the narrative style is more familiar to a modern reader. And the sentence structure is a little bit easier to wrangle than some of the other sections of Tanakh.
Okay, well, that's it. Chapter 1 done. We will see you all again very soon for Chapter 2. If you've got questions about this, please send them in. Thank you very much, Rabbi, for giving us your time.
Oh, it's always my pleasure.
And we'll see you guys again very soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.